Hey, Dean, thanks for coming.
Of course, thank you.
What's the difference between a Navy SEAL and a Green Beret?
Yeah, coming out with the hard questions right out the bat.
Let's go.
Oh, I'm going to get so much crap for this. So, I mean, on a personal level, we're a lot alike, you know, like we like to say everybody's kind of cut from the same cloth. And that's the reason why we think, you know, Green Berets, we can just walk around and hide amongst everybody. But, you know, you take anybody from here, they can literally sit down at the mall and be like, that's a Green Beret, that's a Green Beret, because we all have tattoos, we walk the same. But you know, Navy SEALs or NSWs a lot of the same way. But from a strategic national standpoint, you know, we just have different mission sets, you know, and not that there's some significant overlap with a lot of them, but, you know, and I'm not claiming to be an expert on NSW or Naval Special Warfare, but, you know, they're focused a lot on the immediate actions, you know, and obviously maritime warfare. Green Berets were focused on long-term objectives for nations, you know, partnership development. You know, Ukraine's a perfect example. You know, we were building capacity there, 10 years before Russia invaded Ukraine. So once again, looking at long-term objectives, and we like to think of ourselves as like force multipliers. So we go in and then help build capacity between our nations that we're partnering with, you know, how to make them more lethal. You know, in certain. So there's a lot of similarities that's a really broad question, but on a personal note, we're a lot alike, you know, and I got good Navy SEAL friends and we make the same jokes. It's like talking to the same person. But from a strategic standpoint on what we do in the military, you know, there's a big significant differences there.
Give me an example job, because like it's hard to actually understand it. Because when you were talking to me earlier, you said like you taught public speaking. Like, why does a commando have to learn public speaking?
So as a GB, we work with embassies or country teams a lot. So we don't just go into, you know, the X country and just start doing things the majority of the time. So a lot of the times we have to work with the country team. So that's your ambassador, your chief of station, you know, everybody. And so being able to teach somebody, you know, because like, you know, a Green Beret can go into combat and be completely confident. You throw him in front of public speaking with like 50 people, you'll see him start to shake, you know, and you're just like, wow, this is really what you're scared of. But, you know, going into combat, you're like, that's easy day. And so being able to speak commanders and people of power and influence in different countries, you'll find Green Berets that are meeting with the prime ministers, you know, very influential people and decision makers in foreign countries. So teaching them how to speak in public only helps build their confidence when they have to speak at a forum in whatever country. And so it just helps us build that rapport, articulate what we're trying to do, etc.
Yeah, what other social skills are there that we don't know about?
We want our Green Berets to be very cultured. And so when, you know, it's like the ugly American effect. You come in like, well, this is the way America does it. That should not be the case for us. Every country is different with different laws and, you know, religion, etc. And so we want our people to be able to understand the perception that they're getting from others and be able to make those decisions based off of that. And so that's the reason why, you know, not only public speaking, but on top of it, being able to help them understand some of the problem sets, and the education goes big into that. So you do complete country studies before you go in. So you understand a lot of the stuff, so you don't offend people, because some of the things that you and I take for granted, you know, I see you and, you know, we're friends, but even coming here in America, I can probably come to the gym, meet somebody for the first time, come up and give them a bro hug. You do that in some other countries, they'll be like, who are you and why are you touching me? You know, so it's just small things like that help.
This might come out as weird. I think of you guys as the modern ninjas, because you guys blend in.
We do prepare extensively before we go into countries. I did a good training course out in England, you know, and this is in England. And people were just like, I would literally walk up and order a beer and they'd be like, you're American. So, you know, hiding, you know, within some of these countries are very difficult to do. And hiding's probably the wrong word. But it's more of a respect of, you know, being one with their culture and who they are, rather than just coming in and being like, I'm American and I'm better than you in every way. That's not how you build friendships. That's not how you build solid partnerships with nations. And we represent that, you know, and sometimes that's hard for younger guys to understand, but they'll get it. But it's harder for them to understand that, well, I'm just Dean, you know, what significance am I? Well, here you are in this foreign country, and you may be representing a lot more of the nation than you take credit for. And so we try to ensure that our Green Berets who are going downrange have that complete understanding before they, step on their toes and then make us look bad.
So what's the first step, though, to becoming a Green Beret?
Assessment and selection. When you go out there to Camp McCall, they have a list, and not so much a list, but they're looking for certain characteristics, coachable and stuff. And that's a lot of the things that the guys get wrong. But in short, you go to assessment and selection, and then it's exactly what it sounds like. They do an assessment on you. And if you meet the criteria they're looking for, then you're selected to actually go into the Q course. And then that's a whole nother conversation on what the Q course looks like. But during, assessment and selection, they're looking for these characteristics to become a Green Beret that we want to ensure that they're matching, because then it fits the mold of what we need for a nation.
I've been told that even if guys can pass the selection itself, some of them don't get selected. Can you explain that? Because it seems like there's... can you be more specific in what people are looking for?
Yeah, and so it's definitely the crappy answer is definitely not a one size fits all. So we're looking for a lot of different things. But yes, you can go all the way through selection and be a non-select. And usually, a lot of advice I give for people who want to do it is, showing up in shape and fit is a level 1 task. So if you think going there in phenomenal shape is enough to pass selection, you're incorrect. Yeah, that is a give me. Like, you're going to Special Forces assessment and selection, showing up out of shape, I feel like you're pretty much wasting your time at that point. However, the people who are unfortunately not selected are probably missing some of the characteristics we're looking for. And we want people to, one, be coachable, have that ability to take constructive criticism and be a team player. And so, having that across the board is some of the characteristics that we'll see. And that's the reason why, cat's out of the bag. I don't think it's a big secret in social media today. But, putting that stress on them of those hard physical events really brings out your true characteristics of who you are. Like, you're tired, hungry, you haven't slept, etc. Well, they say, come and says, everybody get up. Who's that guy who's helping pick that other guy up off the ground because he's struggling? Did you walk, 10 extra feet that you didn't have to help him get off the ground because his leg's hurting? It's small things like that these cadre are always in the background just sitting there watching you and seeing, small characteristic traits like that to see like, oh, he does care about other people. He will support other people. Or you have the people who is a complete physical animal. Doesn't get tired, the monster, but only thing he thinks about is himself. He doesn't care what you're doing, doesn't care that it's the team's failing. He's like, but I'm looking good and I'm doing great. It just doesn't really meld well in an ODA.
Yeah, kind of like what we talked about earlier. I mean, yeah, there are probably some bad apples over there, but most of the ones that I met are just really, really good people. And the funny thing about it is there's this kid who's really goofy here and turns out to be a killing machine who's in 10th group. I was like, you're in 10th group? What's next after selection?
Yeah, so if you are selected, you go through the Q course. And so the Q course is made up of many different training events and objectives. And so a few of them you will have to, so after you're selected, normally, at least as I know it today, it may have changed, but you're usually assigned both an MOS or a job and then a language. And your language would highly dictate where you're going. So say if you're giving Russian or Chinese Mandarin, as an example, you're probably going the first group who focuses on the Pacific or Asia. If you're given Russian as a language, you're probably coming to 10th group because we focus on Europe. And then your job, whether you're going to be a Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo, depending on if you're enlisted, depends on what training objectives you're going to do in the Q course. So you have to go and specialize in that job. So
how do you get chosen for that job?
Well, they let you pick. Granted, it's a wish list, because quotas have to be made. So if we're really short, say 18 Echoes or communication sergeants, They're going to try to bump up those numbers because we need more echoes. But for the most part, they're pretty good at giving that person what they're passionate about. So if you're just like, hey, I love medical stuff, well, then you probably have a good chance of becoming 18 Delta so you can specialize in medical. But if you're just like, hey, I'm the 18 Bravo through and through, and I love weapons and I love shooting and security and all that, then you'll probably be that. But so on top of language, then you have SUT, small unit tactics, where you get to learn how to work as a team for small unit tactics. And then obviously language, if I haven't said that already. Then you do SERE school, survival school. And then you do Robin Sage, which is a collective event where you get to work as an ODA in a foreign country.
Are you allowed to talk about SERE school?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I know that other people have on podcasts, so I don't think it's like some big secret or anything. But yeah, you get treated, you get to learn how to survive off the land. You get to learn how to evade. So if you're in a foreign country and say it goes under and they're like, hey, you got to get out of country, you got no assets, how do you evade that country or evade, getting caught and captive, to get out of there? So you get taught those skills. And then, of course, if you are captured, how to resist,
interesting.
Because, POW is a big thing, So in World War II, we had prisoners of war everywhere. So what does that scenario look like? And so your first time doing all that probably shouldn't be when you're an actual captive somewhere. And so they teach you the skills to be able to survive long enough for you to be rescued.
You know the meme online where they say blink twice if you're in trouble?
Yeah.
I'm like, that kind of tactic.
There's a lot of them. And then those are probably the ones we shouldn't talk about because then obviously, and not that, I mean, a lot of them are probably exposed these days. Everybody's writing books about everything. But yeah, there's some tactics that they teach you to kind of help you, assist you in getting recovered, it's because, proof of life, can you show us you're alive? So you may be able to do something where, hey, and usually the captives are cool with that too, because they want to show that they actually have you. So we'll pay a ransom or whatever happens to be the political agenda that week. But yeah.
That said, though, I'm guessing there's an SF job for negotiation, something like that?
No, not really. We stay away from that. I mean, the closest thing is probably our 18 Foxes who focus on intelligence. So they're which that one's more of an advanced MOS, so that's not something you'll do in the Q course. But if you're a senior enlisted guy, you can go to the 18 Fox course, and then you can specialize in intelligence and learn how to build intelligence packets with other people to be able to action.
Mm-hmm. I've been following you for years now, and you're all over the place, especially now too that you're with Black Rifle Coffee.
Yeah.
And how did you make the transition to where you are now from being a Green Beret?
Oh man, well, some of it was blind. I didn't really know what it was, but I knew that I loved the idea of continuing to serve people. It's just something that's kind of built in me. And, Black Rifle, so I did what they call the DoD Skill Bridge program. So you work as an intern for a company as you transition out of the military. And so Black Rifle being a veteran-owned, organization, I felt it would be easier for me to kind of transition to something where there are people like me. And then I love the fact that what they do, a lot of the work they do is to continue to help veterans and first responders. I guess that's hard to explain maybe for some people, but I could care less about making hundreds of millions of dollars. That just doesn't really, that's not something that helps me wake up in the morning. But when I know that some of the work that I'm doing is affecting people in a great way, and I'm changing people's lives, helping with food insecurity or suicide prevention, those are the things that I just love to see the effects of. And Black Rifle gave me that opportunity to be able to do that on a larger scale. So I was like, heck yeah, I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah, what was some of the stuff that you did in the Army before you went to Black Rifle?
The most recent one, I worked over in one of our technology-based companies. I always like nerd stuff. So within 10 Special Forces group, we have everybody's kind of aligned differently like any other business. And then we obviously have a technically proficient one. So it gave me the ability to learn more about what are we doing with AI and ML or machine learning in 2025. What are we doing with UAS systems, counter UAS systems? How is technology changing the battlefield today? And so that specific company within 10th Group allowed me to kind of learn that. So my last job was me really getting the nerd out, and see the next generation of capabilities that are coming out that are changing how we fight warfare. Now you can legitimately have a drone that will hunt you down, fly next to you, and explode a grenade. That is not something that has been done recently until, Ukraine really, made it more relevant, and obviously, Israel with Hamas. But with that new technology, how do you defeat it? How do you mitigate it? Or how do you use that same capability to your advantage? And so those were the problem sets that I got to work against that were pretty cool to kind of take me off the normal grind of what I did before.
What was the normal grind?
Oh, ODA time. So train, so shoot, move, communicate, medicate. And that's the secret sauce too.
Let's backtrack really quick. To those who don't know what ODA is, what's ODA?
Oh, one detachment alpha. So that's what makes up a 12-man, or 12 Green Berets make up one detachment alpha. 6 of them make up a company, and then 4 of them make up a battalion, and then 4 battalions make up a group. Mm-hmm. And then each ODA can specialize in something different. Mm-hmm. So you have an ODA that specializes in free fall, one that specializes in dive, one that specializes in mountaineering, as a few examples. So my ODA time was, what I was going to say is that's the secret sauce that some people tend to, I think the word special messes everybody up. We have this really crazy advanced training and stuff, which to some degree we do have really specialized skills, but really what it comes down is if you want to be a great Green Beret is to just be extremely good at the basics. If you can shoot, move, communicate, medicate, and survive better than the majority of the soldiers out there, then you're probably, special forces material. And that's all ODA life is. You go to the ranges, you shoot. Then you set up training to communicate. So how do you use all your different communication systems? And then medical. So everybody cross trains. And so you'll have your 18 Delta, but you have 2 18 Deltas on a team, ideally. And so people tend to think, and it's natural, if somebody gets shot or needs medical attention, it's the 18 Delta.
Yeah, that's the medic.
Exactly, the medic, which is, obviously. But what if the 18 Delta is not available? Because, we're doing mass casualty, and, both of them are already attending to patients who are critical. So you have to be able to know and own those skills to some degree to be able to help and assist him. So you're very, at a basic level. You're not going to be at the, the medic level, but you're going to be able to patch them up to keep them alive long enough until you can get long-term treatment.
In the corporate world, where they talk about T-shaped, are you familiar with this?
T-shape?
T-shaped individuals, where the long part represents your specialization. It's deep, and then wide is you got to know other stuff as well.
So that's a cool concept. I'll look at that.
That's what I'm thinking about. So
because I'm a big fan, and I don't know if I said this already, but higher attitude, train skill, and that's why Green Berets are selected. That's one of the characteristics we look for as selection, is being highly coachable. And that allows them, with that attitude, to be able to provide that T thing that you're talking about on the skill sets they'll need. Because if they're not coachable, they're great at one thing they do, but every single country, different mission sets, everything can be different. So multiple times in my career, I was told, hey, this, you're going to Afghanistan. Guess what? That's all combat focused. But hey, this time you're going to go to Ukraine and work there. At the time, before the war, that wasn't combat focused. That was build capacity. And so a completely different mission set that you had to change your mind on how you saw things and approach problem sets.
What do you mean capacity?
So building capacity, their ability to get stuff done, giving them the necessary skill sets, weapons, and training to be able to be efficient at what you want them to do.
In Q course, right? What's the failing rate?
Yeah, I think I don't know the exact statistics, but I do know that selection is probably the hardest hurdle to get over. Once you get into the Q course, I don't know the exact statistics, but I'm willing to bet your chances of making it through the Q course are quite significant, simply because they've already weeded out the people who probably don't fit the profile. And I don't want people to get this wrong. It's not like, some vindictive, like you're just not good enough kind of stuff. It's just some people just don't have this certain type of style that we're looking for, and that doesn't make them a bad person. If you failed selection, that's okay. You just weren't the type of profile we were looking for to be able to do this job. And that doesn't take anything away from them being a phenomenal soldier in what they do. You're just not built for this. I'm the exact same thing. I guarantee you, if I went through pre-med, they'd be like, hey, look, Dean, you're just not it, and I'd be like, oh, okay. It's not like a hit on my character or anything. I just didn't fit the mold for what they were looking for, and SF is no different.
What's your wildest story as a GB?
There's a few of them. Trying to think of which ones won't get me in trouble. So everybody tells a lot of combat stories, so I'll go off the grid on this. So since we were talking about the Q course, when I was in the Q course, I was one of the Bravo team leaders.
What's that?
So when you're in SUT, you have alpha team leaders, so they just break you into different squads. And so for this particular ambush we were doing, the Bravo team leader had to stay back and guard the gear while, the rest of the guys went up and set up an ambush for training. And so we ended up putting our rucksacks right next to a graveyard from like a Civil War, stuff. And I remember being out there and then this fog started to come in, and it was like, it just kept rising. And it was all the way up to like my chest. And I had my MVGs or my night vision on. And I remember just continue to climb. And I remember being completely scared to death. That was one of the scariest I've ever been, where I was like, I was known for carrying Skittles in my pocket. So I only ate them when stuff got bad. So in your MREs, you'd always have packets of Skittles. So I always just carried them in there and everything. So I remember like just pulling out my Skittles and just being that completely terrified. And what made it worse is on my radio, I kept hearing this voice. And so I'd obviously key up and be like, hey, come again, I can't hear you. And then the instructor would be like, Dean, quit coming on the radio, nobody's talking. And I'm like, is nobody hearing this? And I just remember just freaking out there. I was like, oh, this is how I end. So that's why I ate my Skittles. Because it was always in my brain, if I ever took a round or got shot or got hurt significantly, I just wanted somebody to hand me my Skittles so I could eat those. Kind of like the modern day cigarette. I didn't smoke. So mine was like, instead of giving me a cigarette, just give me my Skittles so I can eat those while I bled out. I don't know, some reason it eased my mind. But so anyways, obviously I didn't die, but that's one of the funnier ones that isn't war centric.
Were you even allowed to have Skittles?
Yeah. I mean, you get your MREs, so your meal ready eat, the brown bags. So you have those, and you would have, I think it was Skittles and M&Ms that were sometimes depending. So that's where all the guys had them down. I forget what they are now, but they would literally know which MREs carried which candy in it, and they would go for that one. So that was the very small pleasures you'd have in the Q course.
Yeah. Tell me about like your teammates though. Like, how impressive are these guys?
Oh, dude, like on a whole nother level. That was literally some of the, because you always, compare yourself against your peers. And I was lucky enough to be on pretty good ODAs. And I had some phenomenal leaders and phenomenal peers, and two people come to mind. So one is like Frank the Tank Cole. Frank, he was a person that you could never outdo. He would always take you to the next level. He would outshoot you, outrun you. You would sit there and be like, well, Frank, you're not as good at the radio as I am. I can program all these and know how to communicate better than you can. And then he would spend the whole weekend crushing and studying, where he would be asking me questions that he shouldn't know because he was a Bravo and I was an Echo. I'm like, how do you know all this? And so he was phenomenal. And then Bryson Preddy, one of my team sergeants, same as Frank, a complete different operator. And I love the fact that what made him a great person is that he never saw himself as like somebody who was above the ODA. He would never ask anybody on the team to do anything he wasn't willing to do. And if anything, we had to pull him back from time and just be like, hey, let the guys do it, because he would always step up because he was a natural leader of, well, if I'm going to ask somebody to do it, then I better go do it, And So I mean, but I feel like selfishly it made me such a better person, because when you're surrounded by people like that, you don't want to let down your team. And so I would always be comparing myself on, well, man, I need to be in better shape, or, and I'm not a phenomenal shooter, so I'd go out there, I can shoot with the best of them, but with these guys, I mean, they would never miss. And I'm like, and I'd miss once or twice, and they'd be like, man, you're not a great shooter. I'm like, look, that's pretty good. I mean, I scared them on the last round. But yeah, it's just, so that would allowed me to step up, but I can't say enough about some of my teammates. They were always, the reason why I felt like I was extremely successful is because I had good members along and mentors who would show me the right way to do things. And they were very respectful behind it, where they'd come up and, it wasn't like put you on blast, but hey man, like you're really not great at this stuff. And then I'd be like, all right, cool. And then I'd fix it. Once again, be coachable. Some people that, once again, those characteristics you're looking for during the assessment selection is, if you're, one of your teammates are saying, hey, you're not pulling your slack on this, are you the person that says you're wrong? I'm right. Or, hey, thank you. That's a good point. I can improve that. And you do. That's what we're looking for.
Can you give me like an example of a bad character?
Oh, a bad character? Before I was a Green Beret or during a Green Beret, does it matter?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, a bad example. I mean, I kind of already used it, and I won't put them on blast, but I had one of my first leaders I had a lot of personal problems. I remember he would drink Mountain Dews all day, smoke 3 packs of cigarettes, and I remember showing up as a new Green Beret on an ODA, and he was my senior at the time, and I honestly was like, man, did I mess up? Like, is this going to be me in 3 years, where you could just see his anxiety through the roof? This guy has some problems, and I hope he's doing extremely well now. But at the time I was like, I don't want to be like that, and he was just like, yeah, I'm on my second divorce. And I'm like, I don't want to do anything like that. I want to be a good person, and do better. But unfortunately, because of his, personal choices in life, it really affected his leadership. And me being a young guy and hungry for knowledge, because I wanted to prove myself like everybody has to do, I was constantly relying on him to be like, hey, show me how to do this stuff. And it was always, hey, I ain't got time. I got to go take care of this problem. And I'm tired right now, and I don't want to do any of that. And so that was an example of somebody who just, unfortunately, not that they were a bad person, but I think he made so many personal decisions in his life that affected him that he couldn't be an effective leader. And therefore, I, at the time, selfishly didn't get the mentorship I needed early on. Luckily, I had somebody else step up on the side and then kind of take me under their wing and then kind of help correct me. But that was, somewhat of an example of what bad leadership, especially me being young, because you take that for granted. Maybe it was, as I grew up through the ranks, I realized how my actions were, how much my actions were understood and acknowledged by my subordinates that I didn't initially, where if I did things, they would pick up on it like that, kind of like your kids do. They're always watching you. And, whether it's good or bad, they're watching you and taking those characteristics and those things you're doing and applying them to their life. So it took me, probably too long to figure it out. But I was like, wow, I really need to set a better example, because I am being watched and the things I do will be judged, and I need to lead by example.
Yeah, that said, though, do you have a specific leader that stands out?
Oh, so many of them.
A really good one. Give me one example of a really good one.
One of my old commanders, Donovan Blatherwick. I don't know if I can put him on blast or not, but he was one of my company commanders, and such a phenomenal person. He was relatable, coachable. He would take criticism as a senior leader, where you could come up and say, hey, Donnie, this isn't going to work because of X, Y, and Z, and he would listen to you. And he would adjust based off of the feedback and rely on his men to give good feedback for him to make better decisions that represented us. And so he was one of my better mentors I've had, where he would listen to you, and he would apply what you were saying in everyday use of helping us get better as an organization, where it was sometimes it can be, and sometimes rightfully so, it's this way or the highway, a very one directional aspect, but he was really great at receiving constructive criticism and guidance from his enlisted personnel to be, hey, sir, this is where we're messing this up and shape. And it wasn't just smoke and mirrors. He would take it, and you would see him like literally writing this down and taking notes to analyze it later to be able to find a correct way to, bend it, shape it into what made sense for everybody. And I just loved his leadership style.
Do you have a specific situation or a project that you worked with him where he demonstrated that?
Yeah, so this was later on in my career, but he was the company commander when I worked over at the technology company. And we had so many things going on the technology spectrum that he had to rely on because he couldn't focus on everything. And so he was obviously taking the big picture stuff, but the technology spectrum is so wide that he would rely on his men to be like, hey, I need you to learn how we can take AI and ML and incorporate it into this that we can do. And that was a beauty because, some leaders are, and I've been guilty of this before if I don't do it myself, it's not going to happen. He wasn't like that, and he taught me that skill set.
But how about let's go tactical when it comes to leadership? Let's say a situation where, you're given a new subordinate. Let's say you're given a new subordinate. What's the first step to turning that person into a phenomenal leader?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. One is providing the example for them to follow and taking the time. I think something that people say a lot, once again, the smoke and mirrors is, we say a lot, but we don't do a lot. And if you're personally invested in this person to see them succeed, then they probably will. And some of the better leaders that I've seen in how you take somebody and turn them into a great leader is by that direct mentorship on everything. But just like raising children, though, same concept. You got to let them kind of do it their own way, too. You can't just come in and say, like, well, this is how Clint does leadership. You're doing it like this, or it's not going to work and you're going to fail. Because people have different leadership skills. Some people are more, I'm in the front kind of running. Some people kind of set back, and play the chess master kind of thing and move things around. But yeah, that's definitely the first step is the direct engagement and development and taking the time to understand their characteristics of who they are and apply those to help them achieve and take it to the next level. Where what I've seen in the past sometimes is, they'll figure it out on their own. Well, no, get involved, help them out a little bit and take that personal investment in them. And then you'll see them start to change because that matters to them significantly. And you'll see it.
How do you find a balance between, getting involved and micromanaging? Because I had a boss, like when they hired me, she was like, I come up with the vision, you execute. I'm like, excuse me, but I needed a job, but that was a red flag. Do you have situations like that?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. I mean, what we like to work off of is mission and intent and key task. And so most commanders will say, hey, Dean, or the team, this is your mission. This is the intent I have. And these are the key tasks in which you need to execute. Great leaders I've seen, usually once they give that, you can rebuttal and have them specify like, hey, sir, what do you mean by this key task? Are you trying to achieve this or this exactly? And once you kind of have that conversation, but for the most part, they take a step back, because there's always multiple options to, achieve the objective and the end state you're trying to get to. But to your point, the micromanage stuff is, well, hey, sir, you gave me my mission, my key task, and my left and right limits. I'm well within them. And so if they're coming back and, don't get me wrong, there should be some course, correction from time to time. If you're going way out in right field, they're like, hey, bring it back in, you're going a little too far. That is perfectly fine. But if it's one of those where you feel like you're walking on glass, then that person's probably micromanaging you a little too much and needs to trust you and the process because they hired you, because they trusted you to get the job done. Well, have that trust. And by all means, let them fail. And if they fail, then that's when you come back and you give them all that, constructive criticism. And if they can take that, apply it to the next job you give them, and then you see them improving, now you're doing something great. But if you won't let them fail, they're probably not the right person for the job. Or if they did fail, there's probably a good reason, because it's not like they were malign against it, like I'm going to go out there and fail it purposely. But if they can take that constructive criticism, invest in that person, and I guarantee you in a year from now, they will be taking it to levels above what your expectations are. And I see that all the time with my team guys when I was there. We'd take a new guy and we would just let him fail and give him sometimes tasks that were almost impossible. We're just like, there's no way he's going to figure this out. And he would fail it like we all did, and, it'd be like, oh, and then you would see it in their eyes with the complete disappointment and that they didn't get it done. But they would take that constructive criticism. The next go around, we'd have something similar we're trying to do. And I would literally, whisper to my team sergeant and be like, wow, I don't think I could do it any better than that. Like, that is a million times better than I can do it. And now you're a leader. Now you literally took that person. And then before you know it, they'll start outrunning you. And you'd be like, hey, we need to get this, and this done. And he was like, yeah, I did that last week, sir. You're like, oh, okay. So they're like ahead of you. And that's when you just see them blossom. And you're like, wow, they got it.
You know how like some leaders won't mentor their subordinates because they're scared that they might overtake them?
Yeah.
I'm guessing like it's not like that in your community.
Not at all. Well, nothing's ever absolute. We have good leaders and bad leaders like everybody else, but all the great leaders out there, you want that person and it's built purposely that way. So, using myself as an example, I came in as a junior echo, so a communications sergeant. I had a senior echo who mentored me. Well, we had that conversation. Should have mentored me better, but I had a better senior echo. And so what you're doing is, training that person to replace you. And what better compliment in the world than, hey, who trained this guy? Like, well, I trained him up. Okay, cool, you can train people. Because what are you trying to do? You want to become a team sergeant one day, the senior enlisted advisor who oversees the ODA. And so as you work your way up, you're literally always kind of training your replacement. And you'll identify these people and be like, you will be a team sergeant one day because you have the work ethic and everything that is needed behind it. And so, yeah, usually it's a licking ice cream cone where you want to see that person outdo you, because that means you worked yourself out of a job. Hey, I don't need to be the senior anymore. I guess I need the next level of responsibility. And then you move up.
Yeah.
And then, then obviously the fresh crop of new guys come in and the whole cycle starts again.
Yeah, in a way, the system is it's giving you the incentives to go up, right? Because there are some companies where there's a ceiling, and if you have a manager and if you go up and you're going to replace that manager's probably not going to want you to go up,
Yeah.
So that's I don't know. I think,
and there's pros and cons to it, but like everything in life, but yeah, there's absolutely an incentive and an expectation. Like if you're a junior for 3 or 4 years, you should be a senior anytime now. And if you haven't quite met those goals, that's when people will start to look at you funny on what's the problem. Then unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, because it's a performance-based organization. We don't have time for, well, I had these problems and this stuff came up. It's, can you perform in combat or can you not? And it's that simple. And if you're not meeting certain objectives and professionally developing yourself to be able to take these, then you probably just shouldn't be on an ODA anymore. And sometimes they're not.
I think there's a caveat, right, which you talked to me about earlier, about your buddy who stayed as an E7.
Yeah.
So, tell me about that.
Yeah, there's always an asterisk next to everything. But yeah, some people have very specific skill sets that can lock them in the position because it is needed. My friend I was talking about, he was just a cyber guru. You could put him behind a computer and just work magic. However, he wasn't team sergeant material, and by that, once again, nothing against his character, but he wasn't built and made to be a team sergeant to lead a group of men into combat. But he had a very specific niche skill set in which we required. So we're going to utilize that and put him there so he can continue to do that, fully understanding that he's not developing to the next level. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And sometimes, once again, that's sometimes what can bite us in the butt, though, because, big military looks at it, well, Clint's not moving up. That must mean he's not great. Cut him loose. Like, well, no, he's not made for that specific position, but he is probably one of 10 people in the regiment that can do that type of stuff. We should probably keep him around. And that's where you see a lot of senior leaders, have that discussion.
What was Brian doing? What was he doing specifically?
Oh, he was just anything we needed on the cyber realm. Anything you could think of. He'd hack anything and everything. Anything and everything. Inventing new ways to communicate. Over the web that was a little more secure for us. That things that didn't even exist yet. And he was like, "Well, I'll create something." And you're like, and people say that, but who really does that? People who probably have engineering degrees and software engineering degrees and people who've been in schools, but we have a guy that just can naturally do it because he'll go home and read every cyber book there was and has been doing it since he was 5 years old. So those type of people are pretty rare to find within SF because of the majority of us are the same. We're your normal people, but every once in a while you come across a Brian or somebody who has this very niche skill set that is highly valuable, and on that note, some of the skill sets that conventional military bring over to SF help us greatly too. Like I had this good friend who was a mechanic, and the majority SF guys, sure, can we change a tire in the oil? Yeah, absolutely. But this guy was a mechanic before he came Special Forces. We would go down range and he had the ability to be like, oh, the HVAC system went down and this, and he'd be out there tearing it open, fixing it. All of us would be like, I have no idea how to work on an HVAC system, but he was like, oh yeah, it's simple. And so it's just some of those skill sets you would get brought into because of the cross training was absolutely amazing. Brian was the same way. He was a cyber guy who ended up coming into SF and then refined his skills over the years and gave us another kind of really niche skill set that we needed.
From what you're telling me, they're already smart to begin with, right? Mm. Is that an IQ test in selection or something like that? Like, is there like a class? Do you put them through a classroom or even ASVAB? Are you looking at ASVAB?
Oh, yeah. Your GT score, I believe, I don't think it's changed, but you have to have a 110 and above. So I don't know where that is on the scale as far as like IQ genius test or anything like that, but probably just slightly above average or something. But yeah, I mean,
to those who don't know what the GT score, what is it?
Oh, yeah. I don't know what GT score stands for. I'd have to Google GT.
GT. Yeah.
But I just simply know it is when you do take the ASVAB, it's, I think it's the collective score of how you do, and
it's a test, right? It's a written test.
Yeah, it's a written test, and it's kind of like a version of SATs. Everything from mathematics to English literature to basic chemistry. It's an SAT, but very broad, and I think that gives them a very good idea of where you're at on the IQ spectrum. However, like me, I'm definitely not like an extremely intelligent person, right. But you have a work ethic, and that can make up for a ton. And that's where I always came in, and I mean this in a humble way, but I knew that there was people that, my peers who were extremely intelligent that would just figure out things like that. I had to spend the extra time, like on the weekends, reading stuff like 15 times to make sure I had it down. So I made up, mine with work ethic. And then, but they had cons as well because they were so smart on stuff, they couldn't hit the paper when we go to the range, but I could because I was better at that kind of stuff and vice versa. So it's one of those jack of all trades. Everybody kind of has their skill set, but that's what the beauty when you see the team come together. You kind of you see people from different backgrounds. And that's what I always loved about Special Forces is that it didn't matter. You could throw race out the window, sex preference, whatever. And it was just one of those, are you a performer and can you get it done? And to a high degree, and you're there. Not one time. Now, granted, we will mess with each other about everything there is, because we have a sense dark humor, but at the same time, we're all kind of brothers in arms, and you will get messed with, and that's a good sign. If they're not messing with you, there's probably something wrong. So it's good if they're messing with you. But yeah, you would have everybody from different walks of life and experiences that would come in. A lot of people who would come from foreign countries that would help us out. Because, we would be, I had a good friend, David, and where were we? We were in Bosnia. And, this lady comes up and we were going to order food, and he just starts speaking Serbian Croat. And I'm like, how do you speak that? He's like, oh, well, I'm from here. I'm like, well, that's nice. I had no idea that he was born and raised in Bosnia. And he was just like, oh, yeah, my parents lived down the road, I'm like, what? And so just the walks of life you would meet, and you're just like, well, that makes our life easier. And he literally knows everything about the culture and the people and, all that.
Let's step back a little bit. Is it fair to say that most of y'all are obsessive?
Yes. I think that's a fair assessment. I think that we look back and we kind of dial it down as needed. But obsessive, may be too strong of a word, but I would agree with it.
Conscientious,
Yeah. But absolutely, like I go back to Frank the Tank Cole. If you told Frank, hey, you can't do this, or this, you would see a level of obsession that would just overwhelm him. You could see it in his eyes of, oh, you're right, I can't do that. And then in 2 weeks, he would be like phenomenal at it. And you're just so absolutely, you would see that. But in a healthy way for the most part. Obviously some of it wasn't always healthy. And that's that work-life balance, because that's something that we struggle with is you would become so obsessed with becoming better at everything you do that you would forget about your family. You would just be like, I just have to be better at this, and I need to get this next school, and I need to do this. And as you got older, like I did, I would remind the older guys, hey, it's a good saying, but special forces is like a mistress. One day she's going to leave you for a younger man that's better looking and fit. And so what you're going to have is your family. And so take care of them, because one day all this, like it is for me, is coming to an end. And the only thing you're going to have is, your wife or your spouse and your kids. And so don't forget about them. Dusty plaques don't love you back. So forget about the accolades and the pictures on the wall, or not the pictures. The pictures are cool, but the best achievement award, that's great. And it's amazing. And young guys are going to be like, yeah, whatever, you got yours, I got to get mine. And that's cool too. But I would just say, don't forget about, your loved ones, because that is something I struggled with, doing back-to-back deployments for years. My kids were already like talking and in school. And I'm like, wasn't they just born? Like, oh no, he started the 3rd grade. I'm like, oh my God. So it can be hard to find that good work-life balance.
Was it different then than it is now? I'm guessing they're figuring that out nowadays, they're making it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from where I started till now, I think it's light years better. Not that it was absolutely horrible by any means, but the attention that is given to the operator to be able to fix themselves, to be able to spend time with their family. Obviously, the war ending, changed that quite drastically. With Afghanistan shutting down, gave us a little more free time. But yeah, I just in every spectrum too. It's for older guys. It's really easy to kind of say, well, back in my day when stuff was hard. I'm telling you, some of these younger generations that we give a hard time, I go to the Thor gym. They are physically fit. They're more mature than I was. There has been times where I'm just like, man, if I went through now, I don't know if I would make it, because they're just like some elite athletes, very professional. And I'm excited to see what the next generation does, because you can just see, you remember the guy that was in here that you didn't even know was a Green Beret, very quiet professional, very physically fit, everything that we're looking for, and just taking it to a whole nother level. So I think we are continuing to grow.
So yeah, you talk about family, right? I think this is a good. This will be a good transition to the next set of questions about Special Forces Foundation. What's the main problem that the Special Forces Foundation is trying to solve?
No, good question. So it is to complement, everything that a special forces, member and their families don't get through DoD programs. And so the VA does a good job of helping assist them with a lot of things. And there's a lot of pros and cons to all that, of course. But the Special Forces Foundation really focuses on being able to, help fill that gap on some things that aren't needed. So whether that is mental health, whether that is, career transition, finding purpose, suicide prevention's a big one for us. It's kind of holistic across the board, but a lot of those things that really that you won't find in DoD programs, or better yet, that are DoD programs, but are specifically built for SF guys to be able to relate, because we obviously understand the culture very well. And being able to provide them those services that are custom built for them only helps them become a better operator if they're active duty. And then most importantly is when they become a veteran. So when you get out, when you get off the track, and you're retired now, it is very easy to be forgotten. You're not a part of the mission anymore. You're not in the, you're in the brotherhood, but you're not going to work every day and hanging out and doing training with the guys. So you can kind of be forgotten about. And so we help kind of fill that gap by ensuring that they're continued to be assisted, them and their families, until the day you die.
So you mentioned PTSD and suicide. I mean, because like the conversation before this, the way you painted it, right? Like being a GB is an amazing thing if you can get in. How is there PTSD and
suicidal tendencies?
Yeah, tendencies.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I'm a walking example of that. But I don't know. It's just living in a high stress environment. Especially 20 years of warfare, when you had people going back to back to back to back, deployments. It can take its toll. Because not only, if you're in a situation where you lose, because this is a family. So it's not like, you and I just work for this company and we're just, working for Microsoft, and, you work over in accounting, I work over in marketing. Like, I know, like, my subordinates and my peers and my superiors, I know their friends, I know their family, their children. So when you see one of them get lost in combat, it hits you quite significantly. It's not just well, Bob passed away last week. It's not one of those. It's, you were there, and you don't usually die in a normal way. It's something that's a little more tragic. And then you sit there and you see the family that has to go through that. And so that can pay a heavy toll on a lot of our operators because of that stress, whether they're involved directly or not. And I don't know if that's answering your question, but it's just, we're definitely human. So we feel all the emotions, the same things that happens to anybody happens to us, divorces, kids problems, your kid gets sick, and then if you add that with a very high performance stress job, that can have a lot of effects. And while I agree that we've done so much better now today, back then it was one of those, like, kind of like, being raised in the 80s of, you fell down, and some of that's still needed today for sure, but it was just, get up and suck it up. So you weren't ever supposed to show weakness. And what happens if you continue to stomach that over year after year, eventually you're going to break down to some degree. And everybody is affected by it differently. And we're no different.
You mentioned that you experienced it, that you're the reason why you're enrolled. Well, you didn't say this, but unfortunately, you've experienced like tough stuff. I mean, I can edit this out if you want to. Can I ask like what you've been through? Like your story?
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, it took me a long time to get used to talking about it, but I lost my father and two of my uncles to suicide. So you would say it kind of runs in the family. And so, being depressed, and at the time, I knew I had the stresses of going to Afghanistan. What was that? It wasn't too long ago, like what, 2000? Not 2000, 2020. So knowing that was coming up, knowing that I was going to a divorce, knowing all that, it just started to really compound on me. And, and that's the reason why I got so heavily invested in the Special Forces Foundation, is because I didn't want anybody to feel like I did or have an option. And not that I had options, we're just not the best at expressing them. And I'm a perfect example of somebody who will suck it up and not say a damn thing. And I didn't. I literally just kind of shut my life out and kind of hid from everybody. And people who meet me and see me today, they're just like, wow, you're always full of joy and popping around and making jokes. And I do. But I always think it's which made me acutely aware, because the people who do that the most are the ones that I usually start to recognize the most, because I know that I did that because I didn't want other people to feel as sad as I did. And that's why I do that. And so when I see somebody who is really bubbly all the time like that, I can't help but think, if they're going something, that they're doing that just to hide like I did.
It's a mask, right?
It is. Yeah, it's a complete mask that you're trying to hide. But not to make, this about me or anything, but because, I was able to overcome it, which was great. What's that?
How?
Oh, so many. Well, one was my mother. She was kind of always been my rock, so she gave me some good hard advice on, she's always a, quit whining and, suck it up, and you need to get this shit done because I raised you this way. So she giving me that tough love really kind of helped me get through a lot of it. I would say finding purpose was the biggest thing. I was kind of just sitting there on my couch for the, 2 weeks in a row, not moving, and then just realized like, hey, I can either choose to be a victim here, or I can choose to do something better with my life. And I obviously chose the latter. And and then that's when I kind of just said, well, I think finding purpose for me is to help other people. And not only did I do that, but, at the time I weighed 165 pounds.
Jeez,
I was skinny. Yeah, I was tiny. And so I was just like, I am going to fix myself. And so I started hitting the gym. Christy had a big deal with that, her coming into my life. She was great at keeping me on point and, and giving me, encouragement to do better. And then she made some passive aggressive statement on, like, hey, you're pretty skinny. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was going to start hitting the gym again, trying to get back in shape, because once again, I was still a leader in SF. And that made me also feel bad, because I knew my guys could see it. I knew they could see that I was weak, that I was not only weak physically, but mentally. And I started going to therapy for the first time in my life. And I never thought I would actually go to therapy. I wasn't a therapy kind of guy. And not that I believe it being an absolute one or nothing thing, but it's just, once again, it's another tool that I just added to help me kind of get to where I needed to be. And it took me so long to realize it, but I spent so many years working on my ability to shoot, move, communicate, medicate. How often did I spend on my mind? And I didn't, and I saw me going to therapy was no different than going to a shooting range to focus on becoming a better shooter. Me going to therapy was only me getting my mind right so I could make better decisions, exercise, understanding risk, second, third order effects. If I had that clear mind, that only made me a better operator. But at the time when I was younger, I saw it as a weakness. But what I noticed is the better I did at therapy only made me a better operator overall. And I'm like, and so I, once again, trying to be a good leader, I tried to lead by example. And I would tell my guys, like, hey, I'm going to therapy and leaving today to go to a therapy session. And I think that back in the day, that would have been seen as a sign of weakness, but I wanted to show my guys it was okay to go to therapy, even in my position of being a leader, to go and get myself right so I could get back in the fight. And I hope that kind of carried on with them, that's something that they will take now. And then one day when they may need it, they can do it and show that example for their men.
Yeah, it's the same thing for like most of us, us guys, when we listen to I don't know, maybe David Goggins,
Yeah.
It's like, dude, it gets you pumped up, especially if it's your first time hearing him. But when you hear about like mental health, and
Yeah.
I'm like, that doesn't sound sexy at all.
No, not at all. And it's such a touchy subject too, because, what I don't want to give from, especially from like the Special Forces Foundation, is I don't want people to think that like, that all SF guys, when we retire, we're just this broken person who, can't be around fireworks and has 15 mental issues and stuff, because who wants to hire somebody like that? And that's not who we are. When we get out of the military, if you are hiring a Green Beret, just know that, they are professional. There's so many characteristics that maybe if they don't even have that specific skill set that you're looking for, they are trainable. They will show up early. They will leave late. And you're going to tell them, hey, you can't stay late. And they will anyways, because they're, once again, what's the word we used? Obsessive. Yeah, like we're going to work ourselves to death. So, manage them really well, because they will work themselves into the ground. And I don't want to give anybody, especially like outsiders who aren't a part of the community, this impression that, when we get out, our legs and back don't work anymore. And we're going to have all these, while that is the case for some people, the majority of us, will do just fine.
Yeah, especially like the kinds of skills that you learn, 20 years in there, like you said, being in a high performing environment. Like, dude, most of you retire at 40. Yeah. You still have 60. Still have 20 years, 60, 65. You can retire 65 and still be doing great. Let's go back to Special Forces Foundation. Can you talk about one or two program that you have in there that's helping out veterans?
Yeah, so two of my favorites is Project QRF, which stands for Quick Reaction Force if you're not a military guy. And so that's where we work directly with people with suicide tendencies. And so we give people the ability, operators and their families, to give us a call if they're feeling suicidal, depending on where it is. If it's something immediate, then we obviously just call 911 and bring in the professionals. But we do it to kind of show that we'll get to you and bring a licensed physician and a Green Beret to your front doorstep that will help get you to the place you need. So I love Project QRF because it's something that I probably would have utilized when I was in my place. And it works really well because you got like a brother that's showing up. You may not know him, but you know that he has endured everything that you have to get to the place where he is. And so it's very relatable, and you have that common ground to kind of help them get through what they need. And the other one is, well, I'm kind of conflicted. One is what we do for our Gold Stars. So those are our spouses that lost their husband in combat. So we do, everything we do is to help support their legacy, by ensuring they're not forgotten, and to ensure that their families are taken care of, because obviously they're gone. But that doesn't mean their family needs to disappear. So what we do for our Gold Stars is something that's amazing, and that kind of ties into our whole legacy preservation. So an example is like our upcoming Memorial Ruck March that we do, and the other one is the Trojan Horse over at 10th Group, where we have, all the Green Berets that we've fallen, we've have them on there, and we're working to build an entire memorial park for them. So stuff like that to kind of remember those who have come and gone.
Heck yeah. Hey, Dean, where can we find you?
I'm on the Insta now, so I got the Instagram.
Yeah, we'll link you on the description.
Okay, yeah, so I got that. Obviously, specialforcesfoundation.org. You can find our website there. We have a social media page for that too. But yeah, so that's where you can find me.
Sounds good. Hey, Dean, thanks for calling, man.
Yeah, anytime, Clint. Thank you.